The Warriors have officially made it to the second round after escaping a 7-game war with the Rockets. And waiting for them is none other than the sleeping giant in Minnesota, Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves. We haven't actually seen these teams play since the Jimmy Butler trade, so what can we expect? And who has the advantage? The first question to answer for any team going up against the Dubs is how they plan to defend Steph. And although they did get out of that Houston series in 7 games, I actually think the Rockets might have laid a blueprint for how to slow down Golden State's offense. When Steph was on the floor, they had a few key points of emphasis. For one, they wanted Amen Thompson picking up Steph full court like a shadow and basically hounding him wherever he went. In Minnesota, that shadow is going to be Jaden McDaniels, who isn't quite as quick as Amen, but is still really mobile and makes up some of that ground with his added size and length. Of course, Steph's going to run around a ton of screens, and the Rockets kept it simple. Anytime Amen got hit and the second defender involved was a wing, they'd switch to not give up an advantage, as they're comfortable with any one of those guys picking up Steph. I think the Wolves have similar personnel in that regard. Conley's smaller, but still physically capable of holding his own, especially as a chaser. Then between Ant, DiVincenzo, and Alexander Walker, you've got 3 really capable defensive wings who really aren't mismatches. I'd say they try to keep McDaniels on Steph as much as they possibly can, but when chasing a guy around 3 or 4 screens in one possession, you're bound to eventually get hit, and that's when you trigger a switch. The only guy I'd really worry about a little bit is Julius Randle, and if the Wolves decide to switch, I think that's who Steph's gonna look for. But in that LA series, Randle played the best perimeter defense of his career, moving his feet and using his strength to consistently hold his own against Luka or LeBron, and I know Steph's agility makes him a different animal, so Randle might not be able to keep up, and if that's the case, I'd then expect them to have him either hedge or trap. This is something else that the Rockets did extremely well. Anytime the Warriors involved one of Houston's bigs in screening action, they'd jump out aggressively to take away the jumper and either force him to attack the basket or get rid of the ball. And this is where the Warriors start to run into some problems because they run a lot of lineups with multiple non-threats from the three-point line. Whether it's Draymond, GP2, Looney, or even Jimmy Butler, the Wolves are gonna be comfortable letting them take open threes, and their roster is loaded with good paint defenders. Dante and Edwards are 2 of the best rim protecting guards in the NBA. McDaniels is maybe the best rim protecting wing in the NBA. Randle and Reed are both big bodies who can offer some resistance. Oh, and they've got a guy who won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards because of his ability to protect the basket. Speaking of which, I'm fully expecting the Warriors to make a deliberate effort to involve Rudy in every single action, and this is where I think Minnesota has a ton of different options. Like I said, they can do what the Rockets did and have Rudy jump out to the ball. He's mobile enough to not give up threes or driving lanes, then they can rely on those other guys to rotate behind the play and protect the rim. But say they don't want Rudy in space. Another thing they might try doing is pre-switching to keep him on the baseline. They did this a bit against the Lakers, and that was against lineups with 5 shooters. So imagine what it would look like against lineups with 1, 2, even 3 non-shooters. We saw a glimpse in Game 5 when he played 14 minutes against Jared Vanderbilt and basically never left the paint, to which the Lakers attempted 3 total shots at the rim. Clearly, Rudy's most valuable when he's underneath the basket, and that's why they could also try implementing a third strategy. What I'm about to explain would specifically apply to Golden State's motion and off-ball screening action. Because of the non-shooters, they could have Rudy basically sit in the paint while McDaniels or whoever's on Steph top locks the screen. This not only makes it so he can't curl into catch and shoot threes, it means that all backdoor cuts or slips lead directly into rim protection, essentially neutralizing the motion. This is exactly what the Lakers did with Anthony Davis in the 2023 second round, and the Warriors couldn't find a way to unlock Steph's off-ball game, so they switched to a much more heliocentric style of pick-and-roll heavy offense. Then you can get back to your normal coverages, whether that's blitzing with the big or switching with the wings. I know it sounds obvious, but the goal should be to never let Steph shoot off of a screen while not giving up any layups. It's never going to be easy, and there will be breakdowns that you'll have to live with. Also, he's bound to have 2 or 3 games of unconscious shot making that you just tip your cap to, as that just happens when you're the greatest shooter ever. But with good execution, you can force him and the team as a whole to play a lot more one-on-one. Then if you're making Steph play one-on-one, they'll just abandon those non-shooters to wall off the rim while having the point of attack guy overplay the 3, funneling him into that help. For these reasons, I think the pathway to a good offensive series for the Warriors relies on those other guys coming up big. Buddy Hield, Podziemski, and Moody are gonna have to be hitting their 3s, and even more importantly, Jimmy's isolation game is gonna have to be on point. There were moments in the first round, especially when Steph was on the bench, where the Rockets were able to stifle Jimmy's attack either by loading up on drives or even going to a zone, and these are things the Wolves can replicate. That takes me back to my initial point about Houston sort of laying the blueprint. I'd say in totality, the Rockets are the more athletic, more energetic, and lengthier defensive team, so in some ways they could create more chaos, but they don't have anyone who can protect the rim like Gobert, unlocking a little bit more for the Wolves, and more importantly, they aren't even a fraction as good on offense. There's one obvious difference between the Wolves and the Rockets, and it's the fact that Minnesota's one of the best three-point shooting teams in the NBA, while Houston's one of the worst. And this is really important because of how the Warriors like to defend isolations. If you remember game 1 of the first round, the Rockets were making every effort possible to get Steph on an island, and they couldn't create any offense because of what was happening behind the play. Steph would press up on the ball, while either Draymond or Jimmy would cheat over to that side of the floor to immediately load up and play the drive, meaning that the only available shot would be a tough jumper. They were able to consistently go to these types of looks throughout the series because of Houston's lack of shooting. If you've got 2 or 3 guys who the defense actively wants taking 3s, you don't have to worry about the repercussions of overplaying the paint. Now let's take that back to the Wolves. In their starting lineup, you can make the argument that both Randle and Gobert are 2 guys who they can roam off of, but I'd push back a little bit for a few reasons. On one hand, Randle consistently punished the Lakers whenever they dared him to shoot, so letting him catch the ball with space could be pretty dangerous. On the other hand, Gobert's a huge lob target and vertical spacer in a way that neither Şengün or Adams are for the Rockets, so leaving him really compromises your backline defense. Say they are able to take advantage of Rudy's lack of shooting though. That's when the Wolves go to Naz Reid, one of the best three-point shooting bigs in the NBA, and all that's to say they're able to punish aggressive help very well. So what can the Warriors do to contain a guy like Anthony Edwards in isolation? Well, for starters, I'd say they have to make it harder for the Wolves to get the switch they want. With Jalen or Van Vliet, they could soft switch everything and not have to worry about a mismatch. If Ant's playing with 3 or even 4 shooters, letting him get the switch he wants is basically a death sentence because now you're dealing with 40 minutes of drive and kick. I think the Dubs will have to start either GP2 or Moody, and I'd expect those guys to meet Ant with full court ball pressure while fighting over as many screens as possible. If you can at least make Ant have to work to get a switch or a paint touch, you can probably make him settle for more jumpers, and you can probably force some turnovers. And that's especially a big deal in this series because Draymond might be the best possible matchup for neutralizing Julius Randle. Randle was huge for their offense in round 1 with the way he just abused mismatches and applied constant pressure, and I don't really worry about this as long as Draymond's on him. So priority number 1 for this Warriors defense has to be to keep the matchups they want. With Draymond on Randle, I'd expect Jimmy to match up with Gobert, and I don't love that matchup just because of how Rudy's size allows him to get on the glass or above the rim on lobs, like we saw in that monster Game 5, but I do think Jimmy's such a great defender positionally and has such good timing for tipping rebounds off the rim that he should be able to hold his own. If not, then they'll probably have to go to Looney or post like they did against the Rockets, and I don't necessarily love that because then I think Ant's just gonna put those guys in ball screen action. However, by putting 2 on the ball in those spots, you can probably force Rudy to make reads out of the short roll. And if Draymond or Jimmy are the ones rotating over, I'll take my chances with that 10 out of 10 times. This is why the Wolves often turn to Naz Reid to give them that extra offensive threat and decision maker, and while it makes them tougher to guard, it also makes them easier to score on. Remember everything I said about funneling the ball into Rudy as a paint protector? Well, if you're able to play him off the floor offensively, now your biggest problem is solved and you can unlock a lot more of your motion stuff for Steph. So if I were Steve Kerr and it was up to me, these would be my key points of emphasis on defense. Pressure Ant full court, don't let him walk into switches, and just make him work hard for everything. Keep Draymond or Jimmy on Randall at all times. Do not let him get a switch onto any bigs or guards. Keep Rudy off the offensive glass and blitz the ball anytime he screens, forcing him to catch the ball in the middle of the floor. I'd also emphasize not overhelping, especially from one pass away. The Wolves want to create catch and shoot threes, so limiting those opportunities is key. With that said though, some things you just can't game plan for. There's a reason I haven't mentioned Jaden McDaniels yet, and it's because the Warriors simply don't have the personnel to really bother him. They play a lot of smaller wings, which he loves taking advantage of through his slashing and mid-post game. The only way to bother him, in my opinion, is to go to a bigger lineup that allows you to match him up against Jimmy. And I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the series, that's a direction that the Warriors lean in, starting a traditional 5 to match up with Rudy, then going with Draymond on Randall and Jimmy on Jaden. The only problem is that leaves you with a very weak shooting front court, which then allows Rudy to play free safety. On Minnesota's side, I'd say their points of emphasis on defense are a lot more tactical. Keep Jaden on Steph as much as possible, not only because he's the best matchup, but because it allows other guys to conserve their energy for offense. If he gets hit hard by a screen, I'm switching if it's with any one of my wings, then I'm blitzing if it's any one of my bigs, especially Gobert. Speaking of Rudy, I'm keeping him on the baseline as much as I possibly can, whether that's with pre-switching or maybe even a zone, and I'm top locking off-ball screens. This allows you to force one-on-one play, lowering the quality of Steph's threes while still protecting the paint. All things considered, I think one big advantage that the Wolves have is that they're simply gonna be fresher in this series. They're coming off a relatively easy 5 games with everyone on their roster at full strength, while the Warriors barely escaped a tough 7-game series with their 2 best players both fighting injuries. So not only do I expect Minnesota to open the series with more energy, the longer the series goes, I'd expect them to have more and more of an advantage. Like if this gets to 7 games, that would be Golden State's 14th game of the playoffs, relying on 2 35-year-olds and a 37-year-old to play 40 minutes. Whereas for the Wolves, their 23-year-old superstar will be on game 12, as will their 24-year-old lockdown defender and their 25-year-old X-Factor off the bench. In my opinion though, I don't think this series gets to 7 games. My prediction, personally, is the Wolves winning this one in 6. I think they have more ways to slow down the Warriors' offense, I think they have more weapons, and I think the rest and youth will prove to be a big advantage. With that said though, I'm not counting out the Warriors at all. If Jimmy's at 100%, his isolation scoring could cause some problems. If Buddy, Moody, and Pajemski are all hitting 40% of their threes, it becomes a lot harder to overplay Steph. And most importantly, you never know if Steph's gonna string together a god-tier stretch of games to just swing the outcome off of the sheer will of all-time shot making. To me though, the safer pick is the Wolves just doing what they do best and getting out in 6 games, making it to their 2nd straight Western Conference Finals. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think's gonna happen in this series. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.